Hello and welcome to today's session, Cloud Trends and Strategies. My name is Otto Dahl, a senior fellow with the Center for Digital Government. Today we're talking about cloud trends and strategies. Faced with serious economic and social challenges, government organizations are in search of ways to increase scalability, agility, accessibility, and cost efficiency. The cloud is naturally taking center stage in strategic planning, and it is vital to keep up on where the cloud is headed and how to use it to your best advantage. This session explores trends and technologies that will help guide your cloud decisions in the months and years ahead. We're really going to spend the session today in two halves. The first half, I'm going to sit down and have a fireside chat with each of our speakers. And then the second half is we're going to have an open discussion, and I'll have a set of questions that I'll be introducing to that open discussion, but we'd really like for you, the audience, to ask us questions. And so that's where you can raise your hand, or if you're shy, put the question in chat. And I'll be sure to get that into our conversation during the open discussion. So starting off with our first sit down, Rita Goss with State of California. Rita, thank you for joining us today.
And Hi, Otto. I'm happy to be here.
You know, it's really kind of interesting. You know, people talk about, and I remember early on in the cloud technology, when it first came out, everybody talked about vendor lock-in. And so the concerns, you know, did you guys have concerns with vendor lock-in? And if you did, or what were maybe some approaches you took to ensure that you had the flexibility to switch vendors with this cloud technology?
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everybody. So basically, and I know that in the poll here, no cloud migration strategy is the second reasons of the barriers to cloud adoption. Of course, you need to have a cloud strategy, and in order not to be locked in towards one vendor, consider having a multi-cloud strategy. As you know, there's different flavors of the cloud between IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. There's different flavors of the cloud. You must have a strategy to make sure you're not just putting your eggs in one basket, but have a multi-cloud strategy. And I just wanted to also let Otto, just to make sure that cloud is not new nowadays, right? I mean, we have Office 365, everybody's doing. We have WebEx, right now. This is a cloud software. So you need to have a multi-cloud strategy. Also, during your planning, plan your implementation strategy to include an exit plan. That is very important, and make sure when you have that exit plan, how much it's going to cost you to remove or move or transfer your data from one cloud vendor to the other. So you must have an exit plan, and also the potential cost that you need to be part of your strategy. Also, ensure that your cloud provider provides you with a way for you to extract the data. It's important when you're discussing it with your cloud vendor or your partner that they will be able to extract that data, and it's part of those whole the infrastructure or your ecosystem of your IT systems. Also, in order to make sure that you are able to move applications from one cloud to the other, you need to implement others cloud strategy cloud tools as part of your strategy, like DevOps, to make sure that you maximize code portability. And then the last one regarding applications, cloud applications should be loosely linked with the application components that interact with underlying proprietary cloud infrastructure. It's important, it's a different mindset when you're programming or developing applications when you talk about cloud infrastructure, especially if, depending on the flavor of the cloud, service that you're going to avail. So it's important that you decouple some of those services and interoperable between each other so that you can move applications around. So basically, you have to have a multi-cloud strategy.
Yeah, we're dispersing our compute power and our data. And I remember as I was a CIO for City of Minneapolis here in Minnesota. And one of the things we surprised one of our vendors with is we were putting our 311 system in the cloud. And we told them, well, we need to pull anything that's changed in their data every 15 minutes and put it into an internal operational system that was connected to all sorts of other data from other parts of the city. So analysts would have the most up-to-date information by which to do their analysis. And the vendor really was taken by surprise that we would do something that quick. Actually, there were a couple of sources of data that we did even more often than every 15 minutes. So very, very important. It'd be interesting, Rita, I think for that, the fact that constituent identities need to be protected when deploying on a cloud infrastructure. So, there becomes this issue of, will it be outsourced to private vendors, or does government still have a role in protecting the identity? How does that level of security and I guess with privacy as well tie into your decisions when you guys were looking at taking advantage of cloud technology?
Yeah, so of course, identity is very, very important to any of the department in security. Just like information security, when you deal with identities, you have to do a layered approach. So it's not a one solution fits all to make sure that you protect the identities of the constituent. It is a layered approach. So there is both roles for the private sector and the government sector. And just like when you're putting your application to the cloud, it may not mean that it's just one cloud. Sometimes you have multiple clouds in order to environment or multiple cloud applications, different solutions in order for that ecosystem to work properly. So it's the same thing as the identities. There will be, it is a hybrid strategy, just like any of your cloud strategies. When dealing with identities, it will be a hybrid strategy. Government will need to secure and control access to resources across all of your domains and platforms from the public and private clouds. So the government, we still have to do that as a layered approach. And depending on the type of security or security that you need to secure these identities, there's different prongs to that. And you do the same type of layered approach as you do with any kind of security implementation, whether it's the firewall or any other IT security. It's the same thing with identity. It's not a one fits all solution. It is a layered approach and a hybrid strategy between the government and the private vendor. And speaking of about privacy, I mean, you want to make sure that the private vendor that you are going to be partnering with must have all the compliance that meets. So for example, if you need HIPAA, they need to be HIPAA compliant. If you need PCI or whatever the standard that is required for your program, that vendor, your partnered vendor, must be able to comply with whatever security or compliance is needed to support your program.
Yeah, good points. Rita, the audience told us that moving legacy applications to the cloud was a concern and a challenge for them, really. And so what challenges did you guys have with any legacy systems that you were moving over to the cloud that you could give people a heads up on?
Yeah, so for the cloud architecture is very different from the legacy environment. So it's a different mindset, and it's not just about infrastructure. Sometimes everybody thinks that it's just a change on infrastructure, but it's actually also a change on how you program the application or how you develop and design application. When you try to lift and ship a legacy system into the cloud, it can result, it will not receive the full result of the cloud benefits of the cloud. So you may want to think about it. So what is really the purpose of moving to the cloud? Is it a temporary thing? Is there a need for that? Or do you need to change the application or replace the application altogether? So depending on the purpose of the move to the cloud and your strategy, that will define what is the challenge of moving legacy. Now, sometimes in the departments I've worked in moving to the cloud, we may leave some of the legacy system in on-prem and then create a connectivity with other cloud applications that may support the whole ecosystem of the system. So basically, you have different options. It's just about how you strategize. But just think about that the cloud architecture is a different mindset. It's not the same how you would maintain a legacy system into the cloud, and make sure you take advantage of the full benefit. Because sometimes, even on replacing an application, what happens sometimes is that they put it in the cloud, but then the application or a vendor would say, well, our application is cloud ready, but it doesn't really meet the whole cloud benefits. So you could put it in the cloud, but it may not meet the cloud benefits. So you have to make sure, as a CIO in your IT department, will have to make sure that if you're buying an application, you need to make sure that whatever their application is just not sitting in the cloud, but also benefit the cloud environment.
Oh, great insights, Rita. Now let me switch over to Win Elder with Box. Win, again, thank you for sharing your time today, and look forward to talking with you about your experiences from a vendor perch, looking at your customers and prospects as they take on the cloud world. Again, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Otto. Glad to be here.
You know, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the tension, if you will, between security and openness, right? Used to always be concerned about people wanted convenience, but they also wanted to be secure. And, especially as it relates to collaboration, what have you guys seen?
Yeah, thanks, Otto. That's, obviously that dilemma between security and openness has existed since the dawn of IT, but I think both of those pillars have become more important, right? Like, it is even more important for government agencies to be secure with their data and their citizens' data. And the demand for openness has certainly reached a peak during this past 18 months, right? So there's a tension there, but I think the pillars have become even more important. And that's something that, governments and government agencies struggle with around the world at every level, federal, state, and local, and the answer is they always want this modern, scalable architecture. They want to be responsive to both citizen and employee needs, but they need it to be secure. And many times they simply don't have the architecture yet that can be open and secure. So they feel like they have to make a choice between those two things. And sometimes that's true when you're early in that digital transformation. And I think what we've seen holistically over the last 18 months is a bit of a seesaw over between these two pillars, right? Like, right when the pandemic hit, I think we saw a little bit over index towards openness out of necessity to keep government functions up and running. But now we're seeing sort of the seesaw swinging too far back to locking down the network and preventing that collaboration. And it, especially like in the Department of Defense right now, we're seeing that where it's a sort of a bit of an overreaction back to the lockdown. And I don't think that's the right answer. The threats have changed, the technology has changed, and the answer lies in building an architecture that can balance those two competing interests, shifting to a zero trust architecture, enforcing standards, changing culture, ensuring data security at rest and in transit, constant threat monitoring and detection tools, all of those things. And in the end, it's got to be open enough for employees and citizens to accomplish what they need to in 2021 from anywhere. And do it in a user experience, for 2021 and be secure. And so I think this dilemma that has existed for a long time is no longer an either or. It's not as mutually exclusive. The specifics on how you can do both certainly depend on where you currently sit with your transformation, whether you're more legacy and on-prem or whether you're, all the way to your multi-cloud future state environment. The tools, techniques, and procedures you put in place would change as you move along that digital transformation. And I think when we work more, with state and local, what we find is that, their status quo is a bit all over the place. It's a path dependent outcome, because of budgets and legislative priorities, and it is, they have to solve certain problems quickly. And so whatever plan they had in place, it ends up with an architecture that's not maybe what they designed. And so it's a bit of a whack-a-mole. But I think, if I was back in the government and trying to, it's how do you achieve that level of the tools and technology exist today to have both openness and security, and continuing to drive the procurement and integration and architecture decisions towards that future state. The specifics are hard, and that tension will continue to exist, but I think it's not leaning too far one way or the other, and not letting the threat of the moment upend the overall plan to get where you need to go.
Yeah. A couple of the trends these days that are impacting government agency. One is we've now dispersed our staff, right? I mean, we got people working from home. We also have folks, as you were mentioning, concerned then about cybersecurity. The edge has really gone out, right? And so why don't you talk to, how those trends are affecting the digital transformation that everyone is heading towards?
Sure. I would add the third trend probably is budgetary pressures, or at least uncertain budgets, that causes quite a bit of difficulties for transforming your IT. But in some ways, those three trends have existed for some time, and that I think the pandemic didn't create them, but it may have accelerated things that were already in motion, as did maybe the more public ransomware attacks, right? And in a lot of ways, my answer is kind of the same answer to the previous question, right? Like, it's that dilemma between, you've got to have your employees set up to work from anywhere and provide the citizens the ability to get what they need and deliver the mission to the citizens 24/7 from anywhere. And that is putting, it's a wider footprint, that it's a more difficult architecture and network that you're setting up. And you've got to do it securely, right? Like, I think where we're seeing those trends influence digital transformation really is dependent on locale and level of government. We're not seeing the same thing everywhere. Some places we are seeing a bit more of the trend towards security is causing to really lock down data in both silos and behind networks, and kind of over rotating towards the security aspect. And it's causing friction in terms of mission accomplishment and the usability of data and the IT infrastructure. And what's happening is sort of this rise of shadow IT, which maybe we can talk about later, which is not, that doesn't make you more secure, right? The other was what we saw maybe early in the pandemic, where the trend towards work from anywhere was causing people to just say, hey, we've got to get this done. So remove everything and let's just do the best we can. And obviously we've seen the dilemma with that. So, the trend is that, I guess if there's a macro trend, it's sort of over rotating one way or the other based on the bigger perceived threat. Most of the clients we've seen successfully navigate this have a much more robust risk management framework and structure, and a more disciplined spending plan in place, and that tends to help keep the balance between the two trends you talked about.
Yeah, when are you seeing, well, let me go to something you mentioned, and that was shadow IT. What are you seeing, and what can agencies do about it? Is it a really serious thing out there from your perch?
Yeah, it is. The more we dig into it, the bigger this problem is than we thought. And by shadow IT, what I mean is sort of three main practices that employees use to work around security protocols in place inside of an agency. One is the excessive use of unencrypted email. Number two is the use of removable devices and storage devices, and scanning hard data and putting it on their iPhone and sending it that way. And then the third is using free cloud services that are attached to their government email, right? And at Box, we have great insight into that particular case. And we've worked with agencies that have like 5,000 users that are making hundreds of thousands of content and data transactions every month, ungoverned, unmanaged, but it is with government data, right? And it's really weird, Otto, like when we kind of show a government CIO what's going on, it's one of two. It's either, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was going on, let's go fix this, or it's not my concern because it's not inside the managed network. And that really has surprised us how many agencies have took sort of like a see no evil, hear no evil, and it is, but it is, that doesn't mean the threat isn't real. And I think I would leave it as, in this case, what you don't know can hurt, but it is a very prevalent, there is just an incredible amount of government data being shared, collaborated with, transferred outside of the managed networks of the agencies, because government employees just tend to err towards mission accomplishment. And if they don't like the IT structure, they're going to figure out a workaround. And it's 2021. Like, there are ways to provide them the tools to be able to securely collaborate. So anyway, yeah, from our perspective, the shadow IT is a growing problem.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Wynn, thanks for those comments. And I'd like to now chat with Jim Davis over at Excella. Jim, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Sure. You bet.
How are the needs of citizens driving adoption to the cloud? And, how does their usage affect the management of the service? Because obviously government is out to serve folks. So they've got a fair amount of influence on what's going on. What are you guys seeing?
Sure. Well, to build on what Wynn and Rita mentioned as well, there's the 24/7 aspect of citizen requirements. Constituents are looking to get onto the service anytime, inspectors, et cetera. It's a wide breadth of users at any time of the day. So there's definitely that. There's also the trend toward a mixture of infrastructure, or client infrastructure. So desktops, mobile, point of sale terminals. It's getting wider, the desired need for access. So that also demands, a heightened compatibility of a product. It demands more intuitive UIs. Make sure that your wide breadth of users have a similar experience. We talk about multi-language trends, making sure your product's extendable in that fashion, or ADA and 508 compliance and accessibility. There's also the extensibility piece. Citizens are looking for seamless usage and seamless integrations, looking for data in one system, but having it be smart enough or built to pull data from other systems, because they see this in other applications that they use. Rita mentioned other, folks already in the cloud. So they're looking for a consistent experience and wanting that from a product. I would say from a trend standpoint, the biggest driver that we're seeing is really that availability. It's the expectations though for high access anytime. It affects our management or the management from a cloud service provider, notably in making sure that your service is reliable, it has high performance, it scales well, and to what Wynn mentioned, certainly the security aspect of it. So, as a vendor, we have a heightened focus on a disaster recovery plan. Before 18 months ago, the thought of having a disaster recovery plan when you talked about a pandemic was kind of interesting and you had to plan for it, but then it came. And so, the question is, does a provider have a comprehensive, audited, and well-documented disaster recovery plan, for example, to make sure that availability is there for citizens. Like Wynn mentioned, having protections against threats to the service. But then there's also, availability. It ties into having resources available to provide the service. When state and local governments are looking at providing a service, and do they have the skill set and the resources and the 24/7 monitoring availability that they want to provide, I think they look to cloud providers to give that, because really that's a service that's provided by the application development company itself. So, with that, the availability piece, actually, we see it feeding back into the product life cycle. So we can take those particular requirements, even usage metrics, et cetera, and feed that back into what's going to make the product stronger and make it, start to deliver ancillary services that are actually cloud native, as a tie into the product.
Yeah. Given your role as a customer reliability engineer, can you talk to the significance of engagement as agencies adopt and transition to a cloud offering? I know engagement, it's like the second highest priority that CIOs at the state and local level have had actually for the last couple of years. Your thoughts?
Sure, you bet. Yeah, our my role on a customer reliability team is to reduce customer anxiety, and we do that by driving up reliability. And there are a number of ways to do that, but I would say engagement is paramount. And that starts early and often. That's engagement starts in the selection and review process. My team, for example, gets involved in all the way back to the RFP process by being able to describe and articulate the service. Talk about the skill sets that an agency would need as they move into the cloud, et cetera. And then we shift into more of the traditional onboarding process, where we talk about maintaining communication. So the engagement and communication in multiple channels, it's gotten modern as well. So as we've gotten away from maybe in person, or maybe we'll shift back, certainly conference calls, Zooms, WebExes, but even instant messenger. There's a more real-time tie-in that certainly individuals are used to on an individual basis on their phones, other devices that we can tie in as part of the engagement and leverage instant messenger technologies. We also shift to there's a need for a discovery phase, which is early in the onboarding process, but it's a heavy engagement. It's getting all the requirements and use cases up front. Understanding the typical timelines of an onboarding engagement. We talk about user acceptance testing, making sure that the right resources are aligned. So, it's building out a timeline early and often, and that requires a lot of engagement, both from the agency side to shore up resources and dedicate time, and anything else, and also on a application service, the cloud service delivery side, to make sure that those resources and timings align with release schedules, et cetera. So, the CRE has a heavy engagement role. We do a lot of shepherding of new customers into the cloud. They might be new to the cloud. We've worked with agencies that are just starting this journey into the cloud, and they're very excited, and you want to make sure that they lead with the right foot. You have others that are already in the cloud, and their focus is on the service, but it's also on the integrations. How can they leverage what they already have in a series of cloud service offerings with your product? So, it's very engagement heavy. We find that leads to a high level of success. And we find that state and local governments are very eager to, increase that level of engagement and stay plugged in a variety of channels.
Yeah, one last question for you, Jim, and that is, whenever we go to a technology, migrate, in this case to the cloud, I always wanted to have the responsibilities down for what my agency and what, in essence, the city or the state was responsible for versus the cloud service provider. How would you see those responsibilities being meted out between the two entities?
Sure. There's actually there's a ton of overlap. I mean, obviously from the agency side, I mentioned, identifying the requisite internal teams that are going to engage throughout the process, securing their timelines. A lot of them do tend to be almost hidden. We talk about integrations with existing on-premise systems or third-party systems that have existed for a decade or more. And so when we talk about moving to the cloud, that discovery phase that I mentioned is very important because it is a responsibility of the agency to help us as a provider understand, making sure that they're going to be successful in the cloud means that those integrations are maintained or shifted in such a way that the data is still available. It just may be from different means. So there's that definite pull from the agency side. On the service provider side, on the cloud side, I find that there's a heavy responsibility, and I find it well received when we're taking the knowledge that we've incorporated from previous engagements and migrations into the cloud, and we feed that back into the process in whether it's a living document that describes how we do things, our policies and procedures, or it's just there's some institutional know-how that we can bring to the process that we feel like is our responsibility to make them successful in this transition. This has worked for others that have migrated into the cloud. It may not be an exact match, but we know it's going to help you be successful.
Great. Great points. And now, folks, we want to go to the open discussion part of this session. So I'll remind the audience that to get in the queue to ask your questions of Jim, Wynn, and Rita, and again, thank all three of you for your great comments and points. Please, audience, raise your hand by clicking on that button at the bottom of the Zoom console, and we will address your questions. If you don't want to say it out loud, you can go to the chat and put it in there. I'll start looking and keeping an eye on the chat here. So I don't see a hand up yet, but so I'll start with the first question. And Rita, I'd like to ask you, governments have been developing cloud strategies for some time, right? I mean, cloud technology is not something that's brand new. It's been around for some time. How has the pandemic and the environment that we find ourselves in, has that affected your all's plans and timing for your movement to the cloud? Are you still, planning to accelerate into more cloud usage in the future?
Yes, so definitely. I mean, I speak for probably all the departments have seen this. Just alone, the use of Teams and WebEx and Zoom. In the past, we all go to, we have to go to a meeting. You have to be on site in a conference room. And then when the pandemic hits and we have to be offsite, all the Zoom and the Teams, everybody became proficient all of a sudden. If this was not the case, I can guarantee you probably Zoom, what is that at this point? We're still on site, and look at all our conferences. Also the migration to Office 365 for our productivity. Virtual desktop has been accelerated. I'm sure that, in most typical state fashion, we probably would still be doing planning on our virtual desktops if this was not the case that we need to have this immediately. But people, everybody they responded to the crisis, and they all went to having the use of the cloud. In terms of the infrastructure and application, it's just a matter of time. You know, as people are getting more convenient about teleworking and all that stuff, and the productivity that telework brings, there's more on the concept of what can we use the cloud for. And I think there is just that acceleration and the timing, which is probably, we did not want this pandemic to happen, but because of this, we were able to accelerate the use of the cloud in so many fashions.
Yeah, good points, good points. You know, Jim, I'm wondering, the pandemic opened up a lot of issues, and some of those issues really were being solved by going to the cloud. What have you guys seen about on issues out there that governments were trying or planning to use the cloud to support and to solve for them? And what were they doing to prepare? Was it doing business plans? What were the key aspects that folks were relying on to really take advantage and leverage cloud technology?
Sure. One trend that we saw was opening up of CARES funding, which I think was interesting, because even with existing customers, they had an opportunity to expand their services. So, to the extent that additional funds in support of or in addressing the shortfalls in technology that the pandemic kind of exposed, we saw heightened adoption and aggressiveness towards either being a net new customer and a net new adoption for us, or providing ancillary services like data reporting, where a base set of reports may have been sufficient, but now an agency, like Rita mentioned, wants to have data extractions on a more frequent basis, or they want to use this data to also integrate with other systems. So I think there was a heightened focus and planning on how to leverage the existing systems, how to look at new offerings, and then what is the technology, trying to look a bit more under the covers as far as what does the technology offer that gives an agency more resources to maybe track reopenings or closings or permits associated, fast tracking permits associated with some sort of activity related to addressing pandemic issues.
Yeah. One of the things that has always intrigued me in this field we call IT, whenever we make use of a technology, especially something that we haven't particularly used in the past, it always seems like things that we really feared were going to be challenging turned out to be a piece of cake. And then vice versa, things that we didn't really feel were going to be an issue. And I'd really like to get a couple of you to talk to, what, and I'm going to start with Rita, because, being a practitioner, right, we run into this. Any of those scenarios come up where something was really viewed as was going to be challenging and didn't turn out to be that, or vice versa, that something we thought was easy and would turn out to be harder?
Yeah, I think the unknowns. It's mostly the unknowns. That goes with the program. Are the stakeholders? Where's their data? It's no longer in the data center where they could walk to or visit. And then, for IT staff, I can no longer touch something. It's a little bit different mindset, and then the unknowns. I think that's what it is. But once they get into the cloud, they love it. Just like what we're doing now with Zoom and Teams and all of that, right? Before, well, how are we going to meet? We need to see you face to face. But now we're just comfortable opening up that Zoom everywhere. Everybody's just doing that. So I think that's always the unknown of not what is out there that you don't know. But then when they get to realize how convenient it is, and this is not that bad, it doesn't become a problem. But I think for the ones that is, like you said, the ones that they think it's not an issue but become a major challenge, I think it's the cost. So vendors, partners, please make sure, be very upfront of the cost, because sometimes they put you, we get put into a solution thinking this is what it is, and not understanding how it works. It could come up and creep up, and all of a sudden you have this this operational cost of which is a lot. So that's something to consider, is to make sure in your strategy you know the cost of the solution that you're getting into in the cloud, because it's not a fix, it's an operational expense rather than a capital expense. So and they may think, oh, I budgeted it for 20,000, and you wind up with a 90,000 bill. So that becomes a problem if you don't have the budget.
Yeah. Wynn, are you seeing anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I guess for me, what I thought would be a problem that has turned out to be not much of a problem was just sort of this control and governance and visibility of the data. You know, when the cloud first came out, there was just like, well, where is it? Like, what, you know, how will there was just sort of uncertainty with what the technology actually was and where the data resided, and how you could exert controls at multiple levels on what is happening to your data, where it's going, and that there's a forensics that's, you know, that you can do the forensics to find out what's happening to your data. That I think has been less of an issue as the years go by than I think originally. On the other side, what has surprised me that I did not think would be an issue, which is a huge barrier to cloud adoption, which is just this culture and change management, right? And that is coupled with legacy IT systems that there's a lot of powerful forces exerting to keep the status quo, right? Like, you think that the logic of business decisions and agencies would be able to make clean and logical decisions for what to invest in when. And as we've all seen, like, that is not the case. And I think it's just sort of that culture internal to an organization, sometimes just normal resistance to change, uncertainty, shifting priorities, right? Like, some of them are valid reasons for resisting the change, but coupled with just sort of the infrastructure that works to keep legacy systems in place, right? Like, that's more powerful than I would have thought. And I've seen that. I was at Deloitte for a number of years before here, and Apple before that, and I've seen it, you know, everywhere, that you know, when you're trying to travel that digital transformation, it is not easy inside of agencies many times.
Yeah, agree. Well, you know, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we're going to have to begin our wrap up for today's discussion now. First of all, I want to thank our speakers, Jim, Wynn, Rita, for sharing your insights during today's session. I'd also like to put out special thanks to Octabox and Excella for helping to make today's concurrent session possible.